Constance Marten, In the Predator's Grip. Part 2. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Constance Marten and her partner, Mark Gordon, were convicted of gross negligence manslaughter. This was as a consequence of their child dying from hypothermia. They were sentenced to 14 years in prison. In an earlier video, I provided you with the background to their criminal activity, the circumstances in which it arose, amidst the judge's sentencing remarks, to start to paint a picture of these two individuals. Here, I'm going to go into their past, which is to address two factors. First of all, to help us in the assessment of what are these individuals, and secondly, to then help you understand how is it that Constance Marten found herself in the predatory grip of Mark Gordon. What was it about her that resulted in her being drawn into his world with the consequences that followed? When Constance Marten was small, her younger brother struggled to pronounce her name. His mangled attempts came out as Toots, and the affectionate nickname stuck. It was as Toots Marten that the 21-year-old was pictured in Tatler in 2009, posing confidently for its Babe of the Month feature, as she described a carefree life of society parties and summer holidays. Constance Dorothea Marten was born in 1987, the eldest child of the aristocratic Napier Anthony Sturt Marten and his wife Virginie. Impeccably well connected, Marten's paternal grandmother, Mary Anna Marten, was the goddaughter of the late Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother and a playmate to Princess Margaret, while Napier himself was a page to the late Queen. Marten's childhood was one of wealth and privilege, with home being the palatial Critchell House in Dorset, a sprawling Georgian mansion in 5,000 acres of parkland, once described as being more like the mansion of a prince than a country gentleman. The wider estate includes 4 villages, a cricket club, and an ornamental lake. Marten's brother Maximilian, the heir to the estate, was born when she was 1. Tobias followed 3 years later, and Frederick, or Freddie, came along when she was 6. The siblings were close, and their rural childhood was serene, with Marten later describing how they would enjoy naked picnics on the estate and afternoon naps in hay bales and tractor scoops. It all sounds rather idyllic, doesn't it? She was educated in Dorset, first at Hanford Prep School and then at St. Mary's Boarding School in Shaftesbury, where Queen Camilla's daughter, Laura Lopez, had previously been a pupil. Warm and easygoing, Marten was popular with her peers, who regarded her as fun-loving, if sometimes a little rebellious and mischievous. In one incident, during preparations for a school photograph, she wore a pair of thick bottle-bottom joke spectacles, telling the photographer they were special glasses that prevented her from suffering an epileptic seizure when the camera flashed. The spectacles were eventually removed, but the resulting photograph shows Marten squinting Mr. Magoo style at the camera while her friends stifle giggles. The headmistress, Mrs. McSwiggan, was so furious she threatened to send Marten's mother the bill for having her edited out of the class photo. The strict Roman Catholic school placed a lot of emphasis on discipline and religion, with pupils required to obey a strict code of conduct and attend Mass regularly. But the endless list of school rules only served to fuel Marten's rebellious streak, and she often clashed with the school authorities. Arty, rather than academic, she later told friends she had been diagnosed with narcolepsy, and despite her popularity, her school years were not always happy. She was also deeply affected at the age of 9, when her father suddenly walked out on the family. In 1996, claiming to be obeying voices in his head, Napier turned his back on his wife and young children and his £115 million fortune, shaved his head, and flew to Australia. He later explained, "Even with small children, I had to leave the house and go pretty much overnight. I do recall having a recognition of myself that I was exhibiting some sort of courage, but of course in many other people's minds, I was exhibiting some sort of cowardice. He was initially away for 6 months, during which time there was no contact with the children, and the resulting divorce was bitter. Now, pausing there. So far, we have a picture of Constance Marten having a privileged, economically superior, idyllic childhood, whereby she exhibited rebellious, naughty behaviours, but nothing serious with regard to criminality. Her father walks out. Potentially a lack of control environment by his departure, which could have ramifications in relation to forging her own personality or attitudes towards relationships. 2 years after Napier left, Martin's mother married a Belgian banker, Guy de Celliers, and the family moved to London, though Martin remained at boarding school. Like many teenagers, she sometimes had a bumpy relationship with her mother and stepfather, but friends of the family insist it was mainly about trivial matters. Relationships with her father were more fragile, and there were long periods when they did not communicate. Having completed her A-levels, Marten decided against applying to university, choosing instead to quench her thirst for adventure by going travelling. A keen mountaineer, she once described her favourite place as being at the top of the Matterhorn, and she was also a regular visitor to Verbier. It was around this time that her deeply Christian mother took her along to the Holy Trinity Brompton Church in West London. The evangelical centre, which was the birthplace of the Alpha movement, had become popular with celebrities including Jerry Halliwell of the Spice Girls and Bear Grylls. Marten became an enthusiastic member of the congregation and threw herself into the social side of the church, attending a Christian summer camp. One friend she met through HTB said she was instantly popular and liked by everyone she met. Toots was just the most lovely girl. We met through the church, but then started hanging out, and would often find ourselves at the same parties together, they said. She had such a huge smile that just lit up the whole room. She had this way of making everyone around her feel warm and happy. People were really drawn to her. Was this a manufactured ability with the utilization of charisma to make people feel engaged, or was this genuine, potentially drawn from emotional empathy to make people feel this way, that she was exhibiting potentially magnet traits of people being drawn to her? But as time passed, she found herself going down a dark path, as in the summer of 2006, she fell under the spell of the abusive Nigerian pastor, T.B. Joshua. The synagogue, Church of All Nations, SCOAN, had been founded in Lagos by Joshua in the late 1980s, and thanks to an aggressive overseas marketing campaign, grew rapidly until at its peak it was attracting more than 2 million visitors a year. Excited by the energy of this charismatic pastor, Marten accompanied her mother on a trip to Nigeria, where they listened to Joshua preach. While there, she was hand-picked by him and persuaded to stay on in Lagos to help run the ministry alongside other white Western disciples. In an interview she later gave about her experiences, she said, "The leader looked me in the eye and said, 'Your family doesn't matter anymore. I'm your father now.'" Pausing there, you're probably getting a flavour as to what T.B. Joshua is, and that there appears to be some susceptibility to such a personality on the part of Constance Marten. Many of the female devotees subsequently alleged that Joshua had assaulted, abused, and even raped them. While there is no suggestion Marten was ever sexually abused during her time in Nigeria, she later described how Joshua would humiliate her and the other white followers. They were disciplined for not standing up when Joshua walked into the room, often made to eat his leftover food, and were forced to survive on just a few hours' sleep a night, a particular problem for Marten, with her recurring issues with narcolepsy. In effect, her vulnerability was being used against her. After 3 months in the compound, she managed to extricate herself from Joshua's tentacles and, with the help of her mother, fled Nigeria. But the time there clearly had a deep impact on her mental well-being, with one friend later remarking, "All I can say is TB Joshua ruined her life." Another source close to the family said Constance was badly traumatised by the whole thing. Everyone talks about two Constances, the person she was before she went to Nigeria and the person who came home. She was profoundly and fundamentally changed. Marten claimed that after returning home she would periodically experience paranormal episodes. In one bizarre incident, she described how she suddenly collapsed in a branch of Starbucks and started laughing uncontrollably. Some years later, she floated the idea of making a documentary exposing some of the exploitative activities in Scoan, but it never materialised. Back in Britain, Marten reconnected with some of her old friends and tried to get her life back on track. Paid work was sporadic, but she did some modelling, attending shoots in Hawaii, and worked as a nanny in Switzerland. Travelling remained her main passion, however, and there were trips to Uganda, India, South America and Nepal, where she volunteered with impoverished children. The fact that she engaged in this volunteering might be supporting the presence of emotional empathy. Around this time, she was a regular fixture on the society circuit, attending lavish and hedonistic parties. In the Tatler interview, she described attending an event hosted by Viscount Cranbourne in Dorset. The theme was the Feast of Bacchus. There was a gambling tent and bunches of grapes hanging from the wall. It was like a debauched feast from ancient Greece, she said. By 2008, she had applied for a place at Leeds University to read Arabic and Middle Eastern studies. She embraced university life from the start, joking in Tatler that she considered cider one of her 5 a day. She also described her ideal man as having red hair and a fiery temperament. According to one university friend, she enjoyed life in the gritty north and appeared to revel in the relative poverty of student life compared with her upbringing. She spent her 3rd year in Cairo, which in 2011 was boiling with unrest as the Arab Spring swept across the region. Excited to be at the centre of such world events, Marten began taking photographs of the mass protests in Tahrir Square and later won an award for her work. In 2012, after graduating with a 2-1, she took up a role as a senior researcher at the London Bureau of Al Jazeera Media Network, with aspirations of becoming a journalist. Fluent in classical and modern Arabic, she hoped she would get a chance to cover stories out in the field, but became increasingly frustrated that her ideas were not picked up by more senior colleagues. One associate who knew her around that time said her woeful timekeeping, which could be a manifestation of a lack of accountability, played a part in her inability to be taken seriously. She would pretty much keep her own hours and come and go as she pleased. She was well liked, but just a bit unreliable, which is not the best way to get on when you are just starting out. During this period, friends also claimed she had an unhappy relationship with a boyfriend that ended badly and left her emotionally vulnerable. Is this an individual showing a propensity for choosing abusive or difficult men for the purposes of relationships? Is it the case that she's replicating those relationships in respect to the relationship that she had with her father? A year after graduating, Marten took a job as a project manager for Rich Mix, a creative charity in East London, but the role only lasted a matter of weeks. By January 2014, she'd been accepted on a 5-month National Council for the Training of Journalists course run by the Press Association in central London. At one stage, her class paid a visit to the Old Bailey, where 10 years later, she would find herself on trial. She was described by others on the course as sweet-natured but slightly eccentric, but she quickly fell behind. She often didn't turn up, one of her fellow students recalled. She would regularly drift off to sleep during shorthand lessons. You would look over and she'd be slumped over the desk and the teacher would just plough on. But she was always very pleasant and approachable. Another said she was a bit older than us and was quite strange. You got that sense that she sort of dabbled in a lot of stuff, but not really had a proper job. She was nice enough, but a bit dreamy and gave the impression that nothing really mattered. A superficial approach to life? Is that because she can't genuinely form connections, or is this simply because life has always been quite easy for her in the sense of a privileged upbringing? A third agreed that Marten was sweet, saying, "You could tell she had a really good heart, but she missed lots of days. I remember she missed her first work placement because she overslept and got into quite a lot of trouble." Initially, she came across as a bit guileless and vulnerable. Then I discovered that she was fluent in Arabic and had been in Tahrir Square during the Arab Spring. She obviously had hidden depths. Marten began touting herself as a freelance journalist, but commissions were few and far between. But with a wide circle of friends and access to a generous trust fund that gave her a monthly allowance of £2,500, life was never dull. By now in her late 20s and with friends starting to settle down, Marten still appeared to be searching for something to give her life meaning. Moving into a house share in the Leytonstone area of East London, she enrolled on a drama course at the East 15 Acting School in Lawton, Essex, and would drive there each day. Anthony Oshinai, 42, a writer who was also on the course, says she was down-to-earth and friendly. Toots was the total opposite of a stereotypical posh woman. She was very helpful and warm, always saying hello to cleaners and even to the handymen. I used to make fun of her a lot. She's fond of breaking wind at spontaneous times. She has absolutely no shame. So I used to say, maybe that's why they call you Toots. She's just very unlike any aristocratic person. But once again, she fell behind in class, despite fellow students remarking on her natural acting talent. I detected a lot of issues with her, Oshinai continues. She said she had lots of problems with her family and spoke of how her parents were not being supportive of her ambitions. She always felt like her parents didn't quite understand her. While Marten did not hide her aristocratic roots, it appears that she carried a certain amount of guilt about them, especially a distant family connection to Oswald Mosley. Her paternal aunt married one of Mosley's sons. Oshinai recalls, "She did tell me one time, 'I hope you're not going to be angry with me if I tell you this. I'm related to Oswald Mosley.' I was like, 'You can't help who you're related to.'" She was due to graduate in July 2016, but around 2 months before the course ended, she dropped out. As well as having fallen behind in her coursework, something, or rather someone, had entered her life. There's the background of Constance Marten, which certainly paints a picture with regard to her personality and upbringing, which will start to cause to form in your mind what she might be, what had happened to her and how that might impact upon her, and also in relation to the susceptibility of falling into the grip of a predator. In part 3, we're going to examine the upbringing of Mark Gordon, which, suffice to say, is the polar opposite of that of Constance Marten. Join me in part 3.